Yugioh is filled with necessary evils, or turn-Indian hand traps as the culture prefer to call them, pseudo floodgates which serve to lock your opponent out of the game mechanics, once certain conditions are met, that is. They are necessary, but a frustrating part of the game. But why exactly are they necessary? Well, that's because Yugioh is an incredibly fast trading card game with some of the best mechanics out there. Turns are interactive and intricate, with some decks being so complicated that they need a PhD to pilot. Yes, I'm looking at you, Memento, Ritual Beast, and Triple D. However, Konami is a business first, and to ensure that they sell more product, they constantly have to raise the ceiling on what new decks and cards can do. This power creep means that older decks no longer feel rewarding and are replaced with cards that do more, with fewer restrictions. In fact, most of the modern monsters have up to 3 effects, while those printed just a few years ago have 2 at best. Of course, this is only half of their business model. See, good business is to create a problem and then sell a solution. So to combat these powerful new cards, Konami continues to introduce new counters that serve not only to stop individual cards, but the game mechanics that they take advantage of. Think of Nibiru and Mulchamis, for example. However, sometimes these necessary evils are the result of oversights, or just simply old cards that became good. Think of Droll and Lockbird and Maxi, although the latter is banned in the TCG. Apart from Maxi being an incredibly good card, its banning was also because that it had no activation requirement. Unlike the Mulchamis who require an open board state, Maxi can be shotgunned whenever you want, which kinda separates it from the other turn enders who otherwise can feel a bit bricky. See, most of these cards need to meet a specific activation requirement. Droll needs your opponent to search a card, Nibiru requires 5 summons, and Dimension Shifter required you to have no cards in the grave. However, the format's premium silver bullet, Artifact Lancea, doesn't have any strict activation requirements. You can fire it whenever you want, so long as it's short during your opponent's turn. What's more, as an artifact, it can be cheated out via Sanctum, and as a fairy, it can be searched via Venten. Just ask the Drytron players. The point I'm trying to get to is that Lancia is a very good card, and I would call it balanced if it just checked the decks of the current format. However, it's starting to feel a lot like Dimension Shifter. By this, I mean it is a card that is usually an auto win when it resolves, and that it limits future card design. Sounds like a hot take, but hear me out. So historically, Lancia was played as a card to counter decks like Phantom Knights and Virtual World. But instead of killing these decks outright, it felt like a card that lowered their ceilings at best, without stopping them from playing entirely. Fast forward to the current format and Lancia kinda cooks Ritual Beast, Malice, and Krishron, making it a side deck staple. Now I'm not saying this is a bad thing in this format specifically. All of these decks can get out of hand and make easy work of hand traps, so having a turn ender feels somewhat necessary. However, the problem with Lancia is that as power creep develops, we'll see more and more cards that need the banishment. Remember back when the grave started to feel like a second hand for many decks? Well, that's exactly where the banishment is going. Take a brief peek into the future and we can see that it'll check more and more decks. Orcust and Lunar Light are just 2 of them, and it won't be long until that number increases. Basically, Lancia and Chaos Hunter threaten Konami's business model. They limit the efficacy of new archetypes and support. I know a lot of you are comparing this to Droll, another super old hand trap that punishes decks, who rely too much on their main deck to generate resources. The difference, however, is that Droll still lets your opponent get 1 search, while Lancia can be shotgunned anytime during your opponent's turn. What's more, you can only play up to 3 Droll, but with Thrust, Sanctum, and Venten, you can effectively play up to 12 copies of Lancia in a format where 5+ decks are already needing their banishment. I'm not saying the card should be banned, but I wouldn't be surprised if Konami took some action at some point in the foreseeable future. What do you think?